Okay, welcome back to the Baseline Podcast where we cover all 94 feet. Today, I have a very special guest with me. He played Clemson basketball from 1963 to 66. He's an internal medicine physician since 1981, and he is a childhood friend of Pistol Pete Maravich. He is Dr. Rudy Antoncic. Rudy, how are you doing today?
Good, Jack. Thanks for inviting me for this podcast.
Of course, anytime. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. So obviously you were a friend of Pistol Pete. I presume that you have some unknown stories that you want to tell the audience because I know a lot of stories are published in books and newspapers but I feel like you have some stories that aren't out there in the world and people want to hear them. So if you have anything to share, please tell us.
Well, I knew about Coach Press Maravich for many years. He coached up here in 1955, went to Clemson, I think, 1956. So we had several basketball players in our community went to Clemson. Of course, I was confused when I got the scholarship. I thought Clemson was in Pennsylvania. My dad said, "You ever take geography?" So when I went down to Clemson, I was like 17 years old. And Coach Maravich, he liked me because I'm sort of a flaky guy, and he's a flaky person also. So for the freshman practice every night, I would say from 6 to 7 or 4 to 7, something like that. And many times Coach Maravich would say, "Well, you just play one on one with Pete." And he was 14 years old, probably weighed about 135 pounds, and I was 17 years old and weighed like 198, 6'4". He was about 5'10". And coach would say three things. Number one, let him shoot the ball. Number two, don't punch him or hurt him. And number
Okay.
three, if you can, let him win. And so I played Pete many times, probably 10, 20 times one on one. But Jack, the practice was over, say at 7 o'clock. Coach Maravich had me playing him one on one till like 8:30 at night.
Oh my gosh.
I know one time I had two tests the next morning. And I went back, and I think that was one of the first times I ever drank coffee to try to stay up to take the two tests. But Pete was a young, skinny, cocky kid with a wonderful personality.
Right. That's awesome. So Press was his dad,
Uh,
correct?
Press, Press was he had a brilliant coaching mind, and he wanted Pete. Well, Press went up to North Carolina State, I would say in 1962, after he
Okay.
took the Clemson team to the finals of the ACC. That's never been done by Clemson since that time. And then went up to NC State. The next time I saw Pete, uh, he was in high school, and we all had crew cuts at Clemson. He had a Beatles haircut. And that afternoon, he played for a private school, and he put up 55 points. I was just
My
amazed.
gosh. Yeah.
And then I got to meet him several times over the years. And one time I asked him, I said, "How did you know you were going to be so good?" Well, he was at a summer camp in the Pocono Mountains. And I think he was playing one on one with a guy named, oh, I'll think of the second. He played for Duke University. Jeff Mullins. Mullins played almost like 12 years in the NBA. Great defensive ball player. So Pete got the ball out, 16, make it take it. He ran off 16 straight points against Jeff Mullins.
Oh
And
my goodness.
Jack, he knew he was gonna be good. And
I gotta ask you something. I'm loving this, but what do you think about Pistol Pete in an interview saying that, I don't want to play for so long or I don't want to play for 10 years and then die at a heart attack at the age of 40,
yeah,
right? And then he goes out and like shockingly actually dies playing basketball at the age of 40 of a heart attack. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I I had read about his obituary, and I think they did an autopsy. There's three main arteries going into the heart. There's one that goes right down the middle, one to the right, one to the left. He did not have the one main heart uh, artery which went down the middle. He didn't have that, so he was getting collateral circulation. And the theory is, if he didn't play basketball, he probably would have died at a young age. But he was, just working out constantly and playing and everything.
So, you think the conditioning actually, lengthened his lifespan,
I think so. Sure.
even though it was, pretty short still, 40, but. You think that actually contributed to a longer life?
I would think so because the argument was if he didn't exercise as a young kid, he was very hyper, like I'm hyper too. He was very hyper, always on the go, cocky, arguing, And the interesting thing, there was something in a book where he had written that he knew he was going to be so good because when he was playing me 1-on-1, he was beating me every night and I was supposed to be good. But I didn't tell him. I let him beat me a lot of times,
Right.
give him confidence. But it was really sad to see a young man like that. I guess he was playing pickup ball at a church gym or something.
I think that's the story. That is the story. Yeah. He was at a church. He just collapsed. It's really sad.
But the other thing I remember about Pete, he wanted to go to NC State because his dad was coaching there and playing the ACC.
Uh-huh.
But you had to have 800 SAT, and he did not score 800. And I don't know why he didn't score 800 because he was very bright. And so in the Southeastern Conference, you didn't have that regulation about the SAT. So Coach Maravich was able to take him to LSU, and
Okay.
it was a different story down there.
Gotcha. So I want to move on. I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were of the modern game. So, back when you guys were playing 101 in the 60s when you were at Clemson and there were no three-point shots. And then in the late 70s, the three-point shot was incorporated. And now today's game,
Right.
everyone wants to take a three. They're coming out to warm-up lines, barely stretching and they're taking half-court shots. So I was wondering if you like the three-point revolution or would you rather it, kind of
Well,
level off or go back to what it used to be?
first of all, I don't see how any coach would want to coach college basketball or football because of the new system where they could just the portal system. It's dreadful. You see all these teams just you can be at a school that has like Slippery Rock University up here in Pennsylvania or
Yeah.
Duquesne University if they recruit the right kids. When I played, it was much slower. Nobody dribbled the ball between around your back or between your legs and everything. The things
Hmm.
that Maravich was doing 50, 60 years ago, everybody's doing it now, except that he was a great passer. I don't see so many people able to pass like that. Larry Bird did, of course. Uh, the 3 point, I love it. I really do. It gives a team that has one or two great ball players and three mediocre ball players a chance to win in a game. And I think that's a big thing. The other thing is the game is 100 times faster than when I played. And I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think a team like, say, Duke University, which is like number one in the country right now, do you think they could have beaten the Celtics with their speed? The Celtics or Larry Bird and those guys. I would probably say no, but nobody could keep up with them now.
I don't know. This current Duke team, I feel like obviously with Cooper Flag, anything's possible.
Yeah,
But size-wise, I don't think they match up because they had Parrish, McHale, Bird, and then early on, I think they had Cedric Maxwell.
yeah, they did.
So I think Cooper would get his own, but outside of that, I don't know. Just based on size, I don't think that they would win.
Unless Proctor and the Duke guards could beat Danny Ainge and the other guard they had on fast breaks and things.
Yeah.
Um, I have a friend of mine named Freddie Lewis, and Freddie went to high school with me. He's the only person in the history of basketball. He got drafted out of Arizona State, and he played 1 year with the Royals with who was on the team, Oscar Robinson, Jerry Lucas, and then he went
Yep.
into the ABA for 8 seasons. Then the last season he went back into the NBA. So theoretically, like the 6 degrees of separation, he played against guys that played for everybody since the start of basketball. And I asked him the same question about, would he be able to play against these guys now? And he says it would be difficult because everybody is weightlifting and strength and everything. They didn't have that back at Clemson. One
Mhm.
quick story. One of the football players from Clemson was playing for the Rams. He came back with a sheet of paper, and this was the weightlifting program that the Rams were doing. Well, Coach Roberts, who took over after Coach Maravich left, He told us just to go to a gym with no supervision, and we were lifting, regular weights. And hell, within 2 days, we couldn't even lift our arms. But going back, I think the game is much faster now. I love the what is it, 24 seconds, the clock.
Shot clock. Yep.
A quick story: Dean Smith was one of the worst coaches in America when I played at Clemson. He had Billy Cunningham, Larry Brown, and he never won any ACC tournament down there. And then with the last game I saw at Clemson was in 1966. At halftime, it may have been NC State playing Carolina or Duke. I forget the teams. At halftime, the score was 6-4 with the four corners. And
Gosh.
I looked at the guys, from Clemson, and there was a guy behind me. He had a bottle of whiskey. And I just stole his whiskey. I said, "Let's get the hell out of here." It was terrible. And then Smith changed. Next year he drafted Charlie Scott, and ended up changing the whole program. But I like the fact they have a clock now. It's much faster, and it looks like every time they play, they have to pass the ball 5 times. I believe if you have a shot, take the damn shot.
Okay.
Don't make that last pass, but you see people like Danich play. It's just amazing his passing abilities.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the shot clock really, incorporates this feeling of urgency because otherwise, like you said, a 64 halftime score, you just keep the ball. You score one basket, you're up 2-0. You just keep the ball for as long as possible.
It's dreadful. Duke lost one year. They may have lost that year in '66, and one of the players on the Duke team said he was the leading scorer for Duke. Duke lost like 14-12, and he had 6 points. So that was a big change. And then for Dean Smith to go on and becoming one of the greatest coaches, but I think he realized that you need to get African American students, kids,
Mm.
on the basketball team, and he was the first one that had enough courage to do it with Charlie Scott. And that opened the door for everybody.
So would this be the mid 60s, late 60s?
I think Charlie Scott was 1968, and then they won the ACC tournament, I think, in '69.
Okay.
Because back in
Okay.
those days, freshmen couldn't play the first year. Uh,
Okay.
and then everything changed after that. Like my high school team, we had the third best team in the state. I went to Clemson. Two guys went to Arizona State. One went to Duquesne, and one went to Youngstown. So
Okay.
back in those days, people in this area, there was a lot of scholarships. I would say now there's only 5 or 6 kids in all Western Pennsylvania get Division I scholarships, and
Very
it's
cool.
hard to do.
Very
But
cool.
what do you think about the kids being so tall now? 7 feet tall, 7'1".
Jeez, I don't know. Maybe some of it has to do with diet or different exercise routines. I don't know.
I, I,
But
I was in college all those years, 5 years at Clemson, and I traveled with the team for 4 years because I redshirted 1 year. But
hmm
I saw one person dunk the ball, and it was Billy Cunningham, that one of the greatest ball players, played with Will Chamberlain for the 76ers.
Yeah.
That was amazing because he got the ball underneath the basket. They had Jay Buckley, the guy named Hack Tyson from Duke. They were both 7 feet tall. He just went up and dunked it. Well, heck, you see that every night now. I mean,
Yeah, I know. It's insane.
back in those days, we wore Converse basketball shoes. Everybody did. Now
Yeah.
everybody has your Adidas and Pumas and Nike and everything else. So I think that makes. But plus, I think it's the dietary. I think it's the strength, and kids
Mhm.
start lifting weights when they're like young boys.
Yeah, strength and conditioning, I feel like is just as important as the on the court, work that players put in. Because I mean, you're a tall guy. You're about 6'4", right?
Yep.
So
Forward back in those days was a forward. Now the forwards are all 6'8", 6'9".
I was about to say, I think your height back then would be, I think you were pretty tall for, back in the 60s, even for college, I feel like. Were you one of the tallest on your team?
No, no, we had an amazing family called the Mahaffey brothers. The first one came to Clemson in 1958, and the last one came there about 1967. And they were four brothers. They were all about 6'9", 6'10".
Whoa.
And, the best one was Randy, who I played with. They had Tommy Mahaffey, uh, Donnie Mahaffey, Randy, and Richie Mahaffey. And they were all, but I never saw them dunk the ball one time. And it would be sometimes they'd go up to make a layup and get it blocked and everything else. But But now it's just amazing what these players are able to do.
Right. So I want to ask you another question. So how have you incorporated leadership into your on the court work at Clemson and your off the court work as a doctor? Just describe how you incorporate leadership in those two aspects.
I think that when I went to Clemson, I was 17 years old. I came from a steel mill town in western Pennsylvania. Next thing I know, I'm in the beautiful mountains of South Carolina, Blue Ridge Mountain.
Yeah.
And with basketball, it's discipline. I had to eat dinner at a certain or eat lunch at a certain time. I didn't know when
Hmm.
I was going to eat dinner. And then you got to discipline yourself where if you were tired, you had to take your nap at a certain time. You had to go down and work out for 2.5 hours. And it made you a better person because you had to do that and go back and do your studies. And the physician, it's like this the same way. For years, I had to do 32-hour shifts. They finally stopped that. But I knew I was able to do it because I had discipline to do it. I knew at that time it was going to be make me a better doctor. I
Right.
think just working with a group of people, I have four doctors in our group. We have a Christian, a Jewish doctor, a Muslim doctor, and a Hindu doctor. So it is easy for me to work with these guys,
Hmm.
because I've been training with different diversity groups over the years. But I think basketball or any type of sport, it's so important. It doesn't have to be a sport. Whatever you do in high school, if it has some type of leadership skills, it's going to help you as time goes on. Uh, and I just think that my my 5 years at Clemson made it easier for me to go in the military because I had ROTC training there, and it also made it easier for me when I wasn't accepted to medical school for many years. I finally got into medical school, and I started working when I was 40 years old.
Hmm.
Today's doctor started at the age of 21, but
Right.
I just was determined to do it.
Right.
Now,
So,
here, let me tell you something I find unbelievable.
okay.
There's only been in the ACC, there's only been 8 players that started at the same school 4 or 5 years ago. They're still playing now.
Okay.
Two from Clemson, two from Duke, and it's just unbelievable. Where in the hell did the other 150 kids go? If you had a scholarship to Duke, which I think is one of the best schools in the country, why wouldn't you stay there for 4 or 5 years and get your degree? Why would you be going to Missouri or Tulane or
I don't know. I feel like people step into that situation and, you could have won your conference player of the year. You could have been averaging, 20, 30 points a game in high school, but then you get to a big time D1 program like that, and then you're sitting on the bench and you're not really used to that. So that might be kind of like an ego hit,
yeah?
I feel
Well,
like.
it is in a way because my freshman year I scored 51 points in the game. I don't have any record in my mind how I scored 51. I don't remember anything except that Billy Packer was sitting in the audience because he was playing for Wake Forest at the time. But I reached a point somewhere in my basketball career, I knew I wasn't going to be a starter. And then Coach Roberts was using like 7 or 8 guys every time. So I got together with two other tough guys and said, look, if we're not going to start, we're going to set up a group of guys. We call them Rudy's Raiders, and we used to
Hmm.
beat the crap out of these guys every day. And we never got into a fist fight. But I would say to Wally Ayers, who's a good friend of mine, he was 6'7". I said, look, by me beating you up every night, I'm making you a better ball player. So
Right.
even if you're not a starter, I made the best out of that. I was in student government, vice president of the student council at Clemson, and I roomed with all Southern men for 5 years, and I think that made a difference too.
It's awesome. That's awesome. So to, tie it back to the question, you make it sound like the discipline and leadership from playing basketball with Pete and at Clemson really, translated into the workforce and as your life as a doctor, right?
It certainly has.
Okay.
It certainly has, and even being nice to people at Clemson. I learned before I got there, you say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And
Hmm.
like, I think I do a good job as a physician because I really care about patients. And I think I learned that at Clemson too. I met a lot of kind people. One of the reasons I'm a physician is my roommate was a pre-med student, and he encouraged me to take courses. But once you have any type of leadership, like even yourself playing basketball in high school, it's going to
Mhm.
follow through. You know, what I found out once I went into the military, I was playing 40, 50 games a year as a 30-year-old in the military because
Mhm.
you have those skills to play. And one of my
Mhm.
teams was so bad, I was scoring like 40 points every night. I was, they were all military officers from Germany. I said, shoot the damn ball. We're going to lose anyways. But they were like, very nice people.
Nice. That's awesome. So I was thinking, what advice would you have for someone like myself who is about to enter college this fall? What advice would you have in terms of like any sort of broadcasting experience or time management advice, anything like that?
I would say you're very fortunate that you know what you want to do right now. As a 17-year-old, I had no idea. I just,
Hmm.
I went down there blindly and I knew that I was, like interested in economics to some extent in pre-med. But in your case, I think what you have to do is, first of all, the only thing I really loved in high school was basketball. You have basketball plus this vocation as a broadcaster. You enjoy doing that. I would get as much contact with other people in the community that already have established programs and podcasts and get that experience. But the most important thing, Jack, is if you make up your mind to do something, just do it because you're going to meet so many hurdles along the road. And I think it's good for a kid to have a failure when he's about 13 or 14 years old because a lot of young doctors they come from families they never had any, well, some have adversity, but they made all A's and B's through college and everything. Then they go into medical school in the third year, they give the wrong medicine, they help kill a patient. Then they don't get over it. But if
Yeah.
they would have made a mistake early on, but I would, most important thing, if you have a dream, pursue it. And I think that a lot of people are lucky. I know I was lucky because my dad only had a fourth grade education. He worked in a steel mill, and then he took some law courses. And he was not a lawyer, but he was a district magistrate. And he always encouraged education. And even when I was in medical school, when times are tough for money, he would send me money. But any kid that has a dream, go for it. Are we still there, Jack?
Yeah, we are.
I really,
So it sounded like you are emphasizing networking, just connecting with different people, reaching out to whoever in your desired field and just getting to know them, being nice to people, just seeing what's out there, right?
yeah. When I applied to medical schools in the 70s, 60,000 people applied, 12,000 got in. So there was like 48,000 disappointed people.
Hmm.
So I knew I wasn't going to get medical school. So I decided to go to what I thought was the best school in the country and start doing something in medicine. So I went to Duke as a nursing student for 1 year. And I was the only male with 250 women. And I'm not sure either I flunked out of nursing or they didn't invite me back. But then I got into the Duke PA program, physician associate program, and I was really involved. I had a nice job at Duke, and then somebody told me there was a medical school starting on the island of Grenada in the West Indies, and we just
Hmm.
packed up. My son Josh, who was 3, and my other son Rudy, and we got into a plane and 3 suitcases and pursued the medical education.
Gotcha.
And you have to have a support system too, either, a close friend who supports you or a family. If you don't have that, then it's much harder.
Gotcha.
If you have a dream, just go for it. And if things don't work out, like if you go into some vocation, and I wasn't going to start a practice in my community because I didn't have enough, I just wasn't sure of myself. And so my son, who was 12 years old, said, why don't you start a practice in McKeesport? I said, well, if nobody comes to me, how would I feel? And he said, Dad, he says, your grandpa will get you 1,000 patients. So
Hmm.
it worked out pretty well.
Gotcha. So, are there any other Pistol Pete stories that someone might want to know that isn't out there? Just a personal, you
Yeah.
know, Pistol Pete story.
When I ran into him, I think he was playing for the Hawks, and he said that they beat him up so bad. The guards, the first year, he took like a karate course to be able to
Hmm.
defend himself, and then he had to convince the players on his team to support him. If he was getting beat up by a guard, then they had to start beating up that guard. And what else? I saw him play. I talked about that 55 points. And
Yeah.
like and he wrote in a book that by beating me, he knew he was going to be a great ball player. I really
Yeah.
appreciated that. He
I
had
did see that. I actually did see that. There's a Pistol Pete book that your son gave me a
okay.
couple years ago, and there's a little excerpt in there that mentions you. I don't know if they may have interviewed you, but there's a quote, a little excerpt in there about you guys playing and how, him beating you would make him better and stuff. And
But you know how
just,
what happened was back in those days they didn't have computers or anything. You got scholarships by somebody recommending you, and
Mhm.
they sent one of the best basketball players from Clemson back in the 50s. He was coming through town here, and he called and says, "Hey, let's play a friendly game of basketball." So I went down to my court in Portview, which is a few miles from here. He beat me the first game 16-3 on my court, where I shot 1,000 shots. Next game, he 16-5. So now we're starting the third game, and I says, George, he was in the military, a good defensive ball player. I said, George, I can't even get a damn shot off. I said, every you're holding me. And he says, in the ACC, the referees wouldn't have picked that up. And
Mhm.
here I am. I admire this guy so much. And I said, that's a bunch of bull crap. I says, you're fouling me every effing time. And he says, stop your moaning and bitching and just play. Well, the next two games, I beat him up. I beat him by 16-14.
Oh my
And
gosh.
weeks later, I got a call from Coach Maravich and said, okay, Krajak just beat you up. You beat him up. Would you like to come to Clemson? And I said, sure.
Mhm.
I got the job.
Really? So that's how you got the call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my
What
goodness.
happened? The call was like this. I played against George Krajak, real rough game. Finally, in the fifth game, he said, I see you want to play a fifth game? He says, no, I've had enough. And,
Gotcha.
and then about 2 weeks after that, another guy, Jim Brennan. Brennan's pretty famous because he's the last person that took Clemson to the finals ACC. Jim was averaging 26 points as a freshman at Clemson.
Hmm.
Came up to our community as passing through, and Jim was 6'4". Nick Milastovich is one of the best ball players in the whole state of Ohio. The only reason he came to Clemson is because Press was his like uncle, and then a guy 6'9". Well, three of us played these three guys. We're all good ball players. Well, Brennan puts me up against the wall, and he pushed me into a window that had like wire meshing. And I turned around and I says, "What the hell are you doing?" And then he hit me in the chest. It was like Muhammad Ali hitting Larry Spinks. Man, I
Uh,
went to the ground. I says, and then I had to go across the street and put some ice on my face, and they were still shooting around. I said, okay, either I go home now or I have to get back in this game.
uh,
Uh, I knew that if I got into a fight with Brennan, he was like a Golden Gloves boxing guy too.
mhm.
But I figured I got my big fat Croatian Hungarian legs. And so he went up and I pinned him in a corner and sort of punched him 3 or 4 times, but I wasn't trying
Mhm.
to punch him. He put his hands up like this and blocked it. He said, okay. He says, you already hit me 3 times. So the game is over. And Brennan had a guy who was in a fight with me. He asked if he could come to my house to eat with the other two guys because my mom was making dinner for us. I said, Brendan, I said, you just almost knocked me out. He says, come
Yeah.
on, call me Chook. So we went to my dad's house, or my mom and dad. My dad had an extension cord, for a phone like 50 yards. He brought it out, and Brendan was the one that got on the phone. He says, okay, coach. He says, I come up here, punched Rudy so hard he crumbled to the ground.
Uh-huh.
He got his big fat rear end on me and punched me 3 times. And that's when Coach Maravich said,
Gotcha.
Coach Roberts is coming through your town on Saturday. This was a Thursday. He said, "You got to tell me right now if you want the scholarship to Clemson." And he said,
That's awesome.
we'll sign the contract." And it was Slayton's drugstore.
Oh
I said,
my gosh.
but Jack, back in those days, my contract was for 5 years. I don't know,
Right.
give the kids 1 year or 2 years, or
I think something like that. Yeah.
and every basketball player except one graduated from Clemson. The football players altogether different. They bring in 60 football players every year, try to push kids out. In the end, maybe 15 graduate, one fourth of them. The kids decide now.
Gotcha. That's awesome. I just want to ask one last question.
Okay.
Your main key to success. You have success as a basketball player. You've had success, sort of later in your life, but as a doctor. What's your one key to success, especially for a young person like me?
Let's get the best education and training you can possibly get, and believe in yourself, and help people who surround you, like the doctors that I've hired over the years. They're younger than me. I know they're brighter than me, and it's like a teamwork.
Hmm.
Like I tell people that four doctors working together, I think we could solve almost any medical problem by sharing ideas, talking to consultants. So the most important thing is to, get the best training. Don't be afraid to work overtime. If you have any kind of chance to do something out of the norm, do it. And
Gotcha.
most important thing, just be nice to people. I mean, I've always been sort of a nice person, but my son and my two sons have a better personality than I do, and they have a
Mhm.
lot of kindness too.
That's awesome. All right. Well, that's going to be the episode of the Baseline Podcast. Thank you, Dr. Rudy Antoncic, for your time today.
Thank you, Jack, for inviting me.